From MPB Think Radio, this is Now You're Talking, the award-winning show about the most interesting people and stories of Mississippi. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, an editorial cartoonist committed to telling Mississippi's best stories. As the blackest state in the nation, it is an imperative that Mississippi observe Black History Month. This February, we wanted to sit down with some guests and we can speak about how the contributions from African Americans have shaped and improved our state and how we have definitely accomplished so much this morning. Omo Moses, son of Bob Moses, and Frank Figures are online today. Two men that know a thing or two about civil rights and Mississippi. Both gentlemen have served the Youngest People Project in Jackson, Mississippi. So stay tuned. This is Now You're Talking on MPB Think Radio. First of all, I am very thrilled. The book, The White Peril, a family memoir with Omo Moses. Omo, welcome to the show. It is very good to talk to you. It's an honor to meet you. And Mr. Figures, I feel like I should call you that because I've been reading about you for about 30 years and complete nothing but respect. And I really hope that we can meet in person someday so I can shake your hand. I've always been a huge fan. Thank you for both being on the show today.
Thanks, Marshall. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Omo, total kudos on the book. Fantastic. You are an incredible writer. Enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it for many different reasons. And if somebody asked me, can you give me a mini review on it? I said, well, number one, it's beautifully written. And it's so insightful, number one, because it completely humanizes your dad, which a lot of time history books don't do that because they always write about, these giants of history in the context of the history that they were part of, right? But you have really, truly given us insight to who your dad was. And he was your dad. And that really comes through very well. But he's also an incredible leader in the sense that he created, as you say, the crawl space for you to be able to figure your path in life from being a fantastic basketball star to what you're doing today. So kudos for the book. It's fantastic. And Mr. Figures, thank you so much for being on. You've been a big part of Jackson in the history of Jackson. And so having your voice on the show today means a lot to me.
You're welcome. And I'm honored to be here.
Oh, very good. Someday I'll get you in a cartoon, I promise.
Cartoon work.
No exactly. Which, come to find out, and Omo, to your credit, the way you structured the book, Mr. Figures does play a big part in your life, and then also how the book was titled too, and we'll get to that a little bit as well. Thank you so much for being on, Omo. I know this is probably surreal for you to be on the air after spending so many years of working in Mississippi in the trenches and helping kids and making a huge difference and so forth. And, in a way, I was kind of hoping you'd be here and that you still had that Maxima that you had, because I wanted to see how many million miles you had on that thing by now.
Yeah, that clutch is gone. I mean, I don't know where that ended up, but it ended up somewhere in Mississippi. We had to let go of that car, but it took us a long way.
I bet. How many miles did you end up getting on it? Because I know you at least had two clutches in it.
Yeah. Oh man, it was over 150. Easy. Yeah.
Yeah, I had one of those old Maximas too, and those things could go forever. I think I put 200 on mine. So I was reading the book and I was chuckling. I think honestly, the thing that probably jumped out the most at me from the book was that, and I may have gotten this wrong, but that your dad was 5'7". I thought he was 10 feet tall.
He was a little guy, yeah.
Yeah, I just never in a million years would have figured, because, I saw him on TV and so forth. I never met him personally, but I've just, like I said, he always seemed like he was just a giant, and 5'7", not that 5'7" is terribly short, but I figured he was tall on that. Well, congratulations, like I said, on the book, and I know you've done some signing events and you probably have some more lined up. Do you have anything coming up down this way soon?
Yeah, I'll be back in Jackson. Oh man, I should have the exact date, but I'm working with the two Mississippi museums, and we're gonna do an event. I'll get the date before the end of this conversation, and then we have a couple workshops that we're scheduling with some young people in a correctional facility, and hopefully we'll do something again at one of the local bookstores. But, I have to say, one, thank you for having us, and particularly, for Mr. Figures for joining me. I think it's, Mr. Figures was a bridge between, my dad's generation and our generation. And I spent a lot of time on his porch talking to him about what he saw and what he experienced. And so, he was there when the young people came into Mississippi during the 60s. He was also there when folks left, and kind of understands both the tremendous impact that folks had on the state, but also the work that remains and needs to be done. And so, he was also there when the Algebra Project came in, when I came in, and it was just really important to have him, to be able to be in conversation with him as a bridge between, the 60s generation and my generation, which came of age in the 80s and 90s and was beginning to think about what we can do to change the conditions that young people have to grow out of, and how can we prepare young people to begin to see themselves as having the agency and the ability to confront and challenge some of the things that are in their way.
Mr. Figures, wasn't your daughter in the Algebra Project? Isn't that how you initially met?
Yes, she was. In fact, in the sixth grade at Brinkley Middle School, she and teachers that she had were really excited, and the administration was excited about having a new program at Brinkley that was going to help that Brinkley Middle School that was going to help young people. And I must admit that at first I was somewhat reluctant, because a lot of things that have come to Mississippi. Now, if I live next month, I'll be 3/4 of a century. And most all of that time has been right here in Jackson, Mississippi. In fact, I'm living on land that's been in my family on my father's side. I'm the third generation, and that's over 100 years. And my wife is also from this area, and in the eye shot of where I'm sitting right now. And her grandfather on her father's side has a piece of land that's right close. So we consider ourselves, the home folk. And so we stayed here and watched. But I've seen things come in to Jackson and people exposed to it that have left our people worse off than it was before the thing came. So I was a little reluctant, about the Algebra Project. My wife and I were president of the Brinkley Middle School PTSA, and we were co-presidents. So, we felt that the interests of young people and the development of young people, we had a lot to do with it as having that position. But I soon found out, though, thanks to Mrs. Moses, Omo's mother, because she approached me and said that it was just absolutely, I think she used the word strategic to the development of children that we support this initiative. And we learned about it and we've become supporters. And my daughter was definitely a recipient of Algebra Project way of teaching.
So what's she doing today?
She lives here in Jackson. In fact, she lives over in the Belhaven area. And she works in wholesale shipping and receiving. And then she has a job at night in the entertainment industry.
Ah, so she's she definitely is busy too. So that's fantastic. Omo, I want to say that was a nice shout out to your mom too. Your mom is pretty much a rock star in her own right too. I really love that in the book. I'm talking about, she went back to medical school and she was, when you first moved back to America from Tanzania, she made sure you understood what things were by showing you books from some of the darkest part of our history. Your mom was a pretty strong character also, wasn't she?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny when I started writing the book, I was like, I'm going to try to write it from the perspective of my mom growing up in the South Bronx, because everyone knows about my dad, and, that would be obvious to try to, make that connection between my story and my dad's story. But my mother, she just has a really powerful voice, and she's a beautiful spirit. She's extremely nurturing, and she was the mother not only to us, but to so many people in the community. And it was powerful to see her take on that challenge to go to medical school when she had four kids. I was in about sixth, seventh grade. And, I remember my mom in some ways disappeared from our lives when she did that. And my dad, he had to begin cooking meals and taking care of the house as best as he could while my mom was getting that medical school degree. But I think it's just a testament to one, their commitment to their kids and ensuring that they could provide the best quality of life that they could for us. But also, I think my mom really she thought of her role as a pediatrician, not only from the perspective of her patients, but just thought of it more broadly within the context of, the health of our communities. And so she was always, talking about Black consciousness and connecting our stories and experiences in this country to, stories and experiences that, are less common and are less public. And so, one of my favorite chapters in the book is called Black Consciousness. And it really just connects to the narrative that my mother wanted to create for us, or the narrative that my mother wanted to dispel as we grew up in this country. And, that narrative connects back to Africa and connects back to just a history of Black folks working to, push America to live up to its ideals.
Amen. Amen. I tell you what, why don't we take our first break? And when we come back, we're going to return with Omo and Frank. This is Now You're Talking on MPB Think Radio.
Hello, I'm Desiree Frazier, host of the award-winning news program, Mississippi Edition. We bring you conversations about the latest news from across the Magnolia State. Whether it's politics, healthcare, or education, you'll hear in-depth discussions on issues that matter to you. So join us each weekday morning at 8:30 on MPB Think Radio, or download the podcast, listen through the app, and online.
You're listening to Now You're Talking on MPB Think Radio. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, and we're back with icons and author Omo Moses, son of Bob Moses, and Frank Figures, who's right here from Jackson as well. The new book is The White Peril, a family memoir by Omo. And Omo, thank you so much for writing the book. And I guess Karen Hawthorne, your creative writing teacher in seventh grade, is to be thanked for helping you develop a really incredible and lyrical voice.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Karen, I actually took my first class with her in high school, but it was just a powerful experience being able to, I'm really a quiet person. I didn't talk that much in high school, but she just unlocked something that I had inside me. And, I think it's something that everyone has inside them. When I was in Mississippi a couple of weeks ago talking to Mr. Figures and Albert Sykes, we were just talking about having experience that enable young people to find their voice and to help to hone and shape their voice and communicate that in different ways. And so I'll forever be grateful for Karen enabling me to do that and inspiring me to keep writing. And it was a long journey, but I think it ended up getting done. And so I feel just happy to be able to share the book now with so many people. And, you mentioned earlier this idea of humanizing my dad. And, I think we're in a time and space where there's a lot of dehumanizing language and dehumanizing images. And, when I came to America from Tanzania, that was like my introduction to some of that language and some of those images as it relates to Africa. And so, one of my hopes in the book is really to provide a window into different people's perspectives. And so there is my dad's perspective. And so I was able to transcribe interviews from his experience in the 60s. There's Mr. Figure's perspective. There's the perspective of the young people that were part of the Algebra Project. There's Ramsey Moore's perspective, and there's my great-grandfather's perspective. And so my hope through that is really to humanize, those folks and to really offer their voices and their experiences in a way which people can listen to them and try to make some sense of what they see more broadly.
Your dad's leadership style he wasn't an out front guy. He wasn't the guy that was jumping in front of the camera. He liked to sit in the back of the room and help create systems and allow communities to be able to, push and get their rights and to make sure, and time after time, whether it's in Macomb or in Natchez or wherever he was at, Greenwood, that was his way of leading. And it was in a way, and just reading your journey and your story, because it was so beautifully structured, the way you structured the book. And Mr. Figures actually does come into play when it comes to your great-grandfather and helping you understand more about him. And we'll touch on that in a sec. But also what struck me in your personal journey and the way you wrote it was, your trip to Spain playing basketball, the way you described it, I felt like I was in Spain. So it was really very well done. But it was like you could see you growing throughout the book, and then you realized that the way your dad was in part of your life, he wasn't going to tell you exactly what you needed to do, but he created that space for you to allow you to figure it out. And by you transitioning from basketball, which anybody that understands anything about Cambridge, that's like basketball central. And that was your life and your passion. You played in college, and then one day it was over, and you had to figure out what you were going to do for the rest of your life and to make a difference. And for anybody who reads the book, and they can understand that even no matter what they've experienced in their life, they may see a little bit of themselves in it. And I thought that was one of the things I really enjoyed on the book, was how the fact that your dad and your great-grandfather were able to help you find, like you said, the crawl space to be able to make it what you're doing today.
Oh, no, thank you. It's kind of wild when I look back and I read some of the things my great-grandfather said, and he talked about the past forever rolling up into the future. And my dad, the way he thought about the movement as a wave, and SNCC being a wave in an ocean of movement. And so as much as I tried to kind of chart my own course, I feel like the forces have drawn me to what I'm doing. And, Mississippi was really an important place for our family. I think of Mississippi as the place where our family was born. And by me being able to come there at a time when, I had no clue what my purpose should be, and just being able to build relationships with the young people, being able to connect with the elders like Mr. Figures, I really just found a purpose. And that purpose, connected to my dad's work, my mom's work, Mr. Figure's work, all the work of Hollis Watkins, so many people, June Johnson, that have done work in Mississippi. And it also unknowingly connected me to my great-grandfather's work.
Mr. Figures played a part in that by handing you a copy of your great-grandfather's book, which happened to just be titled?
The White Peril.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's where you got the title from on that. So, Mr.
Yeah.
Figures, talk about that, because that book was actually one of your favorite books and one that meant a lot to you. Why did you decide to give it to Omo?
Primarily because he kind of asked for it.
Well, that's a good reason right there. So.
But it developed like this. As we got started working in the development of the Algebra project at Brinkley Middle School, it did a tremendous thing with children, with young people. It made them want education. Now, the limitations were at that time, because of budgetary restraints and stuff like that, school buildings closed at 5 o'clock, and it just wasn't in the budget to keep this building open. But children were demanding more time to study, to learn this mathematics, to learn this algebra, in preparation of showing the district and the world and themselves that they could master this by the 8th grade. And so they were asking for more time. And Dr. Moses was in this conflict with the school district over more time. And so we suggested that maybe they could come to churches after 5 o'clock in the evening. And of course he said, well, which churches will we go to? And my wife and I are members of the Shady, and daughter are members of the Shady Grove Missionary Baptist Church, which is right around the corner from Brinkley Middle School. Also, Albert is a member of Shady Grove. Albert Sykes is a member of Shady Grove Missionary Baptist Church. So we got permission from the church officials and for the Algebra project to come there. But Dr. Moses said, well, I need to inspect it. So we agree on a time for him to do a walkthrough to make sure that the space and everything was sufficient and adequate and would support young people in their interest in learning more mathematics from 6 in the evening to 9, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings. And so in the corridor of Shady Grove, I can almost see it right now, just as it was happening. He said, well, my grandfather was a preacher, a pastor. And I said, oh, what's your grandfather's name? And he said, W.H. Moses. And I said, oh, I know him. And so he looks at me. Dr. Moses is not the kind of guy that's going to call you a lie, but he looked at me and say, Frank, you really couldn't have known him because your age, you're younger than me. And I said, well, I participate in the National Baptist work, and I was proud to say that. And I know I get to meet a lot of people through that work. And so after the tour, everything seemed to go all right, but I was worried through the night that he didn't think I knew him, and I thought I did. And come to find out, we had bought some hymn books, Baptist Standard Hymnal and Gospel Pearls, and some Bibles that were published by the National Baptist Publishing House in Nashville, Tennessee, 330 Charlotte Avenue. And W.H. Moses was instrumental in building in acquiring that building. In fact, he gave a report after it had been in existence 3 years in the mid 1920s that it was already making a profit. Now, when we bought the books, the then pastor asked me to do a dedication of the books. And I did, but in doing that, I had to learn about the origin of the books. And so it was in that I came across his report, Dr. W.H. Moses' report in the mid 1920s. And he said that the publishing house within 3 years had already began to make a profit, supplying printed material for 20,000 churches around the country. And so I found the book that I had where Dr. W.H. Moses gives this report, and the dedicatory address that I wrote, and I carried it up to the school the next morning and showed it to Dr. Moses. And so then later on, he invited me to where he was staying, to his house, and Omo and Taba, and they were there, and he served me some tea, took an apple and cut it up and brought it out on a platter, and the tea out on a platter, and had me to know this is the way they do guests in Africa, in Tanzania. And then he went back and come back with the book and gave it to me. And I was just ecstatic to see, a greater portion of his writing. And man, was I blown away about the thought in the 1920s that went into that, the questions he was asking, the consciousness that he was trying to raise, and the critical way to think about our spirituality. I was just amazed.
He had an incredibly powerful voice and an incredibly courageous one too.
Yes. In fact, to give you, when you say courageous, I mean, that's a great way to describe it, because what was going on in the mid-20s, as you know, Mr. Ramsey, and Omo does too, the Elaine massacre hadn't been long happened. The Tulsa massacre hadn't been long happened. The LaFleur County massacre hadn't been, LaFleur County, Mississippi massacre hadn't been long happened. And these were all where our people of African descent, had attempted within this system to assert themselves, to make a better life and to demand a fair deal. But all of this violence, these lynchings, all around were going on. And at the same time, here was this figure, Marcus Garvey, who was trying to move people forward for a better life. And he took a universal approach to that. And he, Mr. Garvey, was going around campaigning, for a universal approach to the challenges that we were facing in this country. And for him to be saying that, he goes right into that framework of struggle.
It's incredible. And Omo, to your credit, I mean, the fact you even start out with him writing his obituary just a few years before he dies, but it's really powerful too. When you sat down to write this book, and about to say, this was not, I'm going to write it in 6 months and publish it and so forth. This was a very long journey. How did you come up with the idea of structuring it, the way you did, and then also too, telling the story that you did?
Yeah. It really took a long time, and for whatever reason, I just like to collect stuff. And so every time I would hear something or see something that resonated with me, I just kind of put it away somewhere. And When I stumbled on the White Peril of the book, I just held on to that. And it was really powerful to hear my great grandfather's voice. And I began looking for other things that he had written. And so I was able to find a speech that he gave, after Marcus Garvey was arrested, speaking to, you know, basically if Marcus Garvey is in jail, then we're all on our way, into jail, and just making that connection between how Marcus Garvey had connected with everyday folks to try to change stuff and build an economic agenda for folks in this country. And so, there were just all these voices, and then there's my own voice, and trying to write that. And so I think I kind of stumbled on it. And honestly, I went to a lot of writing workshops, and I shared my writings with a bunch of folks to try to get a sense of what could possibly work. And to be 100% honest, I haven't read it front to back, this last version. And so I'm waiting to get, a couple days to myself to sit down and work through it and see if it works, at least from my perspective. But I think my assumption was that, if I could tell the story of in one direction, and that direction was, us coming out of Africa and going into Mississippi. And so that's kind of one thread, me as a young person coming out of Africa and eventually ending up in Mississippi. And then just thinking about my dad's journey into Mississippi. And so, I tried to, structure it in a way where, those we were converging. And so, really in Mississippi, that my journey was converging with my dad's journey into Mississippi. And my great grandfather and eventually my dad, I think they provided a backdrop for that journey, and particularly my great grandfather in terms of what he was saying through that sermon. I think answers the question like why we needed to go into Mississippi, or why we need to go into really any place in America and try to work with folks to help America live up to its ideals. So I don't know, I look forward to reading it, in a quiet place by myself and getting a sense of, what worked, what didn't work. But, just thinking about the voices, I feel like having my great grandfather's voice, and it was a prophetic voice, I mean, I think the things that
You could write,
he
yeah, it
talked
could go
about,
for today, whatever. I mean, what he wrote could
yeah.
definitely apply today.
Yeah, so what he was talking about in 1919 applied in 1960, it applies right now. And I can't say that I knew that, you know what I mean? I just took a leap of faith that his voice was important, and I wanted to share that, with the world. And my dad's voice, I wanted to share that. And so I love to write, and so I think I write in a particular way. And so the challenge was, well, how can my writing style help be a bridge between, those voices and those generations?
You and I are about the same age. We're both kids of the 80s. And like I said, I was reading it. And I didn't grow up in Cambridge. I grew up in Atlanta, a little different situation. But I mean, I could relate to some of it, even though I couldn't relate to some of it, but still to see that. But there was one assembly where you went to, and your dad was speaking, and he got up and told the story of Greenwood when he was driving, and, the bad guys came up next to him with a grease gun, shot up the car, hit his friend Jimmy, who survived but was wounded terribly. And you're sitting there, number one, and of course, he was kind of looking at you, smiling, knowing that you probably wanted to crawl under your seat, because your dad was talking. But that was kind of one of those wake-up moments for you when you realize that, this guy that, cooks your dinner when your mom's at medical school is this giant and what's doing amazing things on that. Talk about that. That had to be a really eye-opening moment for you.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember it as if it was yesterday, just, because my dad was really quiet and unassuming. I think he had a powerful presence in particular spaces, but, when he was with his family, he was just really, somewhat withdrawn. And so to be able to see him kind of moving through a crowd and standing on a stage in front of us, and up to that point, my question, well, what has he done that enables him to do that, that makes him worthy of that stage, and he's done so much. But I mean, the first response as a kid is like, what is he gonna do? I hope he doesn't do something to embarrass me, you know? And then he started speaking, and I associate, I mean, the story he talked about the most was that experience with Jimmy, Travis, and others. And so I associate that story with that moment. And it's my dad and so many others had put themselves in harm's way, and it was at that point that I began to see him in the way that so many others have seen him. And I'll give him and my mom credit. I think they really enabled us to, like you said, they created some crawl space for us to develop our own identity within the context of all the work that they've done. And it all led us to really being children of the movement and being part of the work that they've done. But it we got there through our own decisions. And so that was the first moment where I began to see him as someone that was important to our collective history, and began to get more curious about, who that person was, what led him to do the things that he did.
I tell you what, why don't we take our final break? When we come back, we're going to talk about how that crawl space led to where you are today, and talk about a little bit as well. We'll be back with Omo and Frank. This is Now You're Talking on MPB Think Radio.
Together through the years, together in the future. MPB, your stories, our mission.
You're listening to Now You're Talking on MPB Think Radio. I am your host, Marshall Ramsey, and I'm back with two men that know quite a bit about human rights movement here in Mississippi, Omo Moses and Frank Figures. Welcome back to the show. And Omo's book is The White Peril, a family memoir. I highly recommend it. Really fantastic read. And there's a great quote on the back of it that says, The White Peril is a searing, honest, vulnerable, profound, and undeniable. I loved it. And in the distance between Omo's experience and mine, in the same place at the same critical age, is the distance between Black and White America by Ben Affleck. Omo, yeah, I realize that you and Ben went to school together, right?
Yeah. We played baseball together, minor league, major league baseball, and then went to high school. We graduated in the same class.
Oh, wow. So the baseball thing didn't work out for him, but he did okay for himself.
Oh, he certainly did okay. It was funny. I was watching the Super Bowl and he and Matt are up to their old tricks. And so, they had a couple commercials during the Super Bowl.
I saw that. After reading the book, I want to go back and watch Good Will Hunting again too. Because were there any glimpses of any of that movie that you recognized, or was it totally different than your experience growing up?
You know what was interesting? They captured this outsider experience. So even growing up in Cambridge, you're the locals, and so you have all these folks from Harvard and MIT, and there's a little bit of tension there. And so I think they really captured, our experience as local Cambridgians, trying to connect to these institutions, these elite institutions, and folks that are in those spaces. And which actually was a big theme in my book, because I grew up on the campus of Harvard University for a while. And the first thing I noticed were all these fences. And I tried to relate to just this idea that, even if you're physically there, you couldn't really belong to Harvard University. You couldn't belong to those spaces. In a similar way to, I think, we're trying to struggle to anchor ourselves in this society.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's to go back to your dad, which, by the way, I mean, to think that they would ever come back to Mississippi after what they went through, I mean, that just says an awful lot about their commitment to their fellow man and being able to help the kids and being able to do some really great things and to be advocates. But also, too, just the humanity. I mean, when you're talking to your dad about some of the things that happened in his life and everything, it almost reminds me of a veteran who, survived the Battle of the Bulge or something and never talked about it for all those years. And then they finally opened up to you about it a little bit. It kind of remember that's a little bit of a PTSD. So the fact that he came back, and I remember when that article ran in the New York Times, I got here in 96. So it was when I got here to Mississippi. And, and I was thinking about this quote, Ben Affleck's quote. The book helped me see some things, even though I've lived here for nearly 30 years, that I have never seen, because it just allowed me to have a little bit different and a better perspective on that. But your dad having a psychology, philosophy background, just being able to understand human nature and everything, for him to come up with the whole idea of teaching math to be able to create communities was nothing short of brilliant.
yeah, I mean, I think what he understood. Well, I think the first thing I want to say was that my uncle would say, my dad was never the same after he went to Mississippi, and so obviously he knew who my dad was before. And so I think in some ways, Bob Moses was born in Mississippi, and it was the only place where I think he really felt like he was at home. And so it was less about, you know, him coming back. It was more about he needed Mississippi. He needed to be in Mississippi. And I think what he was trying to do through the Algebra Project was the same thing that they were trying to do through the movement, and that was um, really how to challenge and change the relationship that people had with America's economic system, with America's what he ended up calling, America's caste system. And so I think, in some ways he saw how they were able to gain access to social things, how they were able to gain some political access. But I think he really understood that, you really needed to change your relationship to the economic arrangements of this country to be able to have some self-determination in this country. And so, I think algebra in particular, I think it was his insight to see that math position young people to have a different relationship with the educational system and a different relationship with this economy. And I think he thought about it from the perspective of, one, how do you as an individual make a way through, but then through the Algebra Project by organizing communities and family members, how can we raise the floor so that, all the eighth grade students in Brinkley can take algebra in the eighth grade and have an opportunity to have a different relationship with this country and challenge the educational systems and structures in this country that are really, sorting people to do certain types of things and to be able to work in certain spaces. And so, yeah, that's my thought. I don't know, Mr. Figures, if you have any additional insights to that.
Mr. Figures?
I can only just add to it the the way that Mississippi, the state of Mississippi, tied literacy to civic responsibility, to voter registration, and then appropriated a certain amount of money to the for public education and divided it up between people who were descendants of the non-enslaved population and people who were descendants of the formerly enslaved population. In other words, Mississippi gave one segment of the population maybe $1 for education, and another segment of the population maybe just 13 to 15 cents, and then required everybody to take subjective literacy tests in order to have the right of citizenship, and that was voting, and made everything that would determine a better life tied to voting really crystallized within people who were doing freedom work in various communities around the state of Mississippi, in teaching people basic literacy skills. And now in the 90s, here's a group of young people who are getting ready to face what we have now in that's this technological age, where you have to have, certain skills. And then that's mathematically driven to open the door of mathematics for that to happen, for children to get it. And then the most amazing thing is young people wanted it. In the way that they presented it, it made young people want it and want more of it. And then the resistance came not based on race, but just based on budget. And so then the community had to become engaged and offer avenues of support for these young people and teachers who wanted more education, more time to study. Can you imagine a student asking for more time to study, to do work?
And that's the brilliance of it, was how it was taught. And Omo, I know that's a big part of your life now. You're the CEO of Math Talks. You're an education technology company. You're reaching to kids in the way that they live now. You're doing it through the phone, through electronics, through an app. But the thing is, and I wish I'd had algebra taught to me that way too, where it became a community where I wanted to do it, where I was excited about it. I mean, it just was a brilliant way to teach math.
Yeah, I mean, the slogan with the Algebra Project is algebra for all. And this country doesn't have a culture that supports math learning. And so part of what the Algebra Project understood was that you can learn math through things that are familiar. You can learn math through your community. You can learn math through your culture. And so when you do that, it becomes more meaningful. It becomes valuable. It's something that is real versus something that's just in a book that you need to memorize, that you need to answer correctly. And so I've tried to continue to extend that work through Math Talk and really thinking about how we can light a spark in kids at an early age so that they begin to see math everywhere and they see themselves as having, the agency to work with it, to talk about it, and to do things with it that are meaningful for them. And so an example is my son and I spent a lot of time riding the trains, and we talked a lot about math while we were riding the trains, or while we were making breakfast. There's so much math that is naturally a part of making breakfast. And so, that work continues both through Math Talk, through the Young People's Project and the Algebra Project and others, is to really transform the relationship that young people can have with math, and to support adults to be conduits to.
We've run out of time. Gentlemen, thank you both for being on. The book is The White Peril. I highly recommend it. Stay tuned for Southern Remedy Healthy and Fit. That's coming up next. Thank you, Lacey, for producing a great show. Join us again next Monday. I want to thank once again Omo Moses and Frank Figures for joining us today. And thank you for listening. I hope you all have a great week.